You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 48, Alice. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas. Gonna let you in on a little secret. Each week on Gene-ology, we cover one of Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing exploits, trying to find out if he buried in his early works the kind of morals, meanings, and messages that were part of the package in his most famous later work, Star Trek.
This week, we meet Alice, eventually, after searching for her in a town that seems to have a lot of dark secrets.
Earl will be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here is how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it is also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at MissionLogPod. While you're at it, please leave us a review and rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. 5 stars, please and thank you. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, are you a rich widow with a terrible secret?
Strangely enough, no. But that being said, let's fast forward again. Alice is episode 27 of the 5th season of Have Gun Will Travel. So again, it's been about a year since Paladin's adventures were graced by a Gene Roddenberry script. So this is a further year on from El Paso's stage, which we covered in the previous installment of the show. Since Gene's 1961 Have Gun script, he had written a pilot episode for The Joan Crawford Show, which was filmed, but is now lost media except for its script. Hang tight, we will tell you about it when the time comes, because we've got the script, and it's quite something. 3 series pilots, Defiance County, APO 923, and a police drama called Nightstick, had come and gone, each of them being filmed, hitting the air as TV movies of the week. Unfortunately, we have not been able to track any of these down in viewable form, but we do have some scripts. Later in 1962, out of necessity as much as anything, Gene would return to write 5 more episodes of Have Gun, stretching into early 63, at which point Have Gun reached its natural end. Richard Boone was actually tired of leading the series and was ready to go after the 5th season, but he struck a deal with the producers to come back and do 1 further season so he could gather what he called, as only Richard Boone could describe it, as go-to-hell money. The fall of 1963 would see the debut of Gene's second creation to go to series, The Lieutenant, which he would also produce. From that moment on, Gene would be a creator and producer of his own shows, and his days of writing for other shows, Have Script Will Travel, would be over. That turn in Gene's career, however, was over a year away, so let's meet this week's guest stars. As Maya Ferguson, we have Gina Engstrom, marking her 3rd and final guest role on Have Gun Will Travel. A young actress still very early in her brief career, Gina had already put in guest shots on Shirley Temple's Storybook, My 3 Sons, and Everglades. By the way, that's Everglades with an exclamation point, like it's an Odyssey 2 game or something. And roles on shows like Rawhide and Wagon Train were yet to come. But barely 3 years after her start in the business, Gina left acting to deal with a persistent recurring illness that had already cost her 2 regular series gigs on other shows. Guest starring here as Eli Morgan, Richard Shannon was a TV mainstay in the early 60s, having started out with small film roles in the 50s. This was one of 8 roles he played on Have Gun Will Travel, and as with many actors who return to the show often, never the same character twice. But Richard and Gene were old acquaintances. He had already played a role in Gene's unsold Nightstick pilot, and he appeared in another Gene pilot, 333 Montgomery, which starred an up-and-coming young actor named DeForest Kelley. I wonder whatever happened to him. Neither show went to series, and 333 Montgomery aired as an episode of the Playhouse series Alcoa Theater in 1960. By the way, last I checked, you can spot a copy of 333 Montgomery on YouTube.
What?
Richard's career trail suddenly goes cold in 1963, at least from what I can tell on IMDb, and we lost Richard Shannon in 1989. Perry Cook is back. We last saw Perry as the treacherous Dobie O'Brien in Gene's earlier Have Gun Will Travel episode, The Posse, which we covered in episode 43 of Gene-ology. Here, Perry is playing Mr. Briggs, the hotel proprietor. The part of Mrs. Briggs was played by Mary Gregory, who also had appeared more than once on Have Gun, but she would make even more appearances in Richard Boone's next project, appropriately titled The Richard Boone Show, where she would appear in 5 episodes. She would go on to be a regular on The Wacky World of Jonathan Winters, with countless guest appearances well into the 21st century, and she often found herself playing judges. And finally, Alice herself is played by Jeanette Nolan, a veteran of animated films from Disney's underappreciated 70s and 80s lineup, like The Fox and the Hound and The Rescuers. Jeanette also appeared in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Horse Whisperer on the big screen, among many others. And her TV appearances were legion. This was her 4th and final appearance on Have Gun. Again, guess what? Playing a different character every time, including one lady sheriff in another episode that was not written by Gene. But she had also appeared in some prior Roddenberry works as well, including a Gene-scripted episode of another Western, Hotel de Paris, in 1960, a show on which she was a regular, as well as a 1957 episode of the Ziv television series Dr. Christian that Gene wrote, The Philanthropist, which does not exist in our archives in any form, not even as a script. Now, the show might exist on film in the UW-Madison archives of Ziv's television output, but I have not been able to verify that. In the director's chair for this episode is none other than Gary Nelson making his directorial debut. Gary would return to helm 5 more episodes of Have Gun, but he would rack up 14 credits on The Patty Duke Show, 10 episodes of Nanny and the Professor, 23 episodes of Get Smart, 11 episodes of Love American Style, and his CV stretches out to the end of the 20th century, concluding with 19 episodes of Early Edition. But of course, Gary's most famous, or perhaps infamous, directorial credit is the 1979 Disney sci-fi film The Black Hole, #Floaty Robot Buddies, and cut. Oh no, Maximilian, not like that.
Act 1. At the lobby of the Hotel Carlton, Paladin is absorbed in his newspaper, seeming not to note the woman who is clearly looking around the room for someone specific. Paladin bumps into her and finds himself looking at his own business card. Before anyone can check to see whose chocolate wound up in whose peanut butter, the lady introduces herself as Maya Ferguson, daughter of Alice Ferguson, a.k.a. Blue Dollar Alice. Years ago, Alice gave her Paladin's card and told her to find him if she ever needed help. Maya, who was attending school on the East Coast, suddenly stopped getting any letters or money from her mother, and when she returned to Codyville to ask where Alice was, everyone claimed to know no such person. Paladin agrees to take the job and go with her to Codyville, and immediately gets a stern warning that Maya is a lady. When they arrive in Codyville, the first thing Paladin notices is that the local watering hole has been all boarded up. They visit the local hotel to get a couple of rooms for their stay, and Paladin remarks that Codyville was barely even a legitimate town the last time he was here. Briggs, the man running the hotel, says Codyville outgrew that phase. As he says, We've got law and order now. He also warns Paladin of a local law forbidding people from wearing a gun in town. Maya is surprised that Paladin has a history with the town. He opens up a bit more about what brought him here before. Her mother wanted him to kill a man, but he refused. Maya can't square that idea with what she knew of her mother, chiefly through their correspondence while she was away at school. But Paladin still speaks of Alice fondly. Mr. Briggs, in the meantime, steps outside to speak of Alice in a whisper to the local banker, Eli Morgan. Paladin cuts to the chase and asks Morgan about the whereabouts of Blue Dollar Alice, only to be told that she died recently, buried in an unmarked grave, and there was no record of any family to notify. Paladin keeps pushing for information. Morgan vents a bit. According to him, Blue Dollar Alice was a dirty, immoral woman. Paladin wants to speak to the local minister, and Morgan wonders aloud why Paladin can't take his word for it. Paladin's got one reason. He thinks the man is lying. Act 2. Eli Morgan visits the minister and warns him that revealing the truth to Paladin and Maya would ruin every man in his congregation. Morgan leaves just as Paladin arrives with questions. So the minister already knows what questions Paladin will ask. But first, get that gun off your hip. The minister will keep that until Paladin leaves Codyville. Paladin reserves the right to collect it sooner if needed. The moment they start talking about the missing woman, it's clear that the minister is doing some serious judging here, looking down his nose at a man who, quote, lives by the gun or is friends with that kind of woman. Paladin takes a moment to remind the minister of what his own book has to say on the subject of forgiving people. He keeps pressing the minister and reminding him of the need for the truth to come out, however inconvenient a reminder of Codyville's past it might be, until the man finally admits that Blue Dollar Alice is still alive. But where? At the hotel, Maya comes down from her room and is confronted by several women. They claim to have information about her mother that'll be hard to hear. It's also clear that Eli Morgan has sent this delegation. Speaking of Eli Morgan, he spots Paladin exploring the boarded-up tavern and tries to come clean. He lied about Alice being dead. But Paladin knows he lied. He's been lying about a lot of things, such as the fact that Morgan used to be married to Alice. Eli Morgan is the man she hired Paladin to kill. Morgan seems to relent and offers to take Paladin to see her. But it's a ruse to get Paladin to follow him down an alley where some of the fine residents of Codyville club him unconscious. Act 3. Paladin staggers out of the alley just in time to see Briggs escorting Maya to the stagecoach. Once the coach gets moving, Paladin stops it at no small risk to himself and escorts Maya right out the back of the coach. The driver tries to stop Paladin, but is swiftly disarmed. Paladin tells Maya it's time she knew the truth, but she's not interested. But he insists. Eli, Morgan, and the men of the town watch this unfold, but don't interfere. Paladin walks up to the tavern and starts tearing the boards away from the door. He forces the door open, and he and Maya walk inside. Amid the dust and cobwebs, Paladin welcomes Maya to the Blue Dollar Saloon, Alice Ferguson's pride and joy. Alice used to own this block of town, in fact. But Maya has already been given plenty of information about her mother. Paladin counters, saying, "What is evil in a place with white picket fences and starched curtains can be something entirely different in a place where there's nothing but mud and men and aching backs and loneliness." And that's not all he has to tell her. Paladin says that what Alice brought to Codyville was compassion. Sure, there were some ladies who frequented the saloon offering more than compassion, but Alice turned a blind eye to that activity. She turned a tidy profit and provided a cornerstone of what became Codyville. Maya protests that what her mother profited from was immoral, and Paladin argues that whether or not it was immoral, it was not evil. But ultimately, having been the confidant of every man in town, Alice knew too much of everybody's dirty laundry. In some cases, she literally knew where the bodies were buried. Eli Morgan, Mr. Briggs, and several of the local men barge into the saloon, and Morgan says he tried to prevent all of this from coming out. Paladin's response is to start throwing punches. Maya watches as Paladin upholds his reputation as no friend to barroom furniture. Paladin is up against greater numbers, but he's acquitting himself well enough that Morgan runs outside to grab the coach driver's rifle and heads back towards the saloon, not listening when the driver warns him the barrels are full of mud. But Morgan isn't joining the fight. Rather, he's headed upstairs with his weapon. It looks like Paladin's odds might not be too great, when suddenly his gun belt is tossed to him. "Oh, hi, Minister." He offers to take Paladin to Alice when a shot rings out from upstairs. Paladin dashes to the stairs when a door opens and a woman steps out. Paladin and Alice Ferguson recognize each other on sight. Maya sets eyes on her mother for what may be the first time ever, now that she knows the truth. Alice announces that Morgan, trying to kill her, blew himself to pieces. With a smirk, Alice looks down at the rest of the men, noting that it's been a while since they came a-callin'. The Reverend admits it was a mistake to force Alice into being a prisoner in her own establishment. But the rest of the truth comes out. She was writing a memoir that could ruin every man in Codyville. A memoir that Alice keeps rolled up and hidden in one of the decorative features of the banister running down the stairs. She hands it to Paladin before she and her daughter go upstairs to get to know each other properly. The end.
Very well done, Ashley. I think you exposed all of Alice's secrets there. Well, most of them. I suspect she is still holding back a few. But here's a secret that I wasn't expecting. The quote from the episode over the opening credits is back.
Yeah, that was definitely a surprise. I'm like, oh, they're doing that again? I'm curious, like, did they pick it up or did they just do it off and on, or?
I don't know. There is another possibility that I thought of, which is that it could be that what we have preserved that has been released on DVD and what is available through Pluto TV or what have you, these could be the syndication versions of these episodes. It could be that trims have been made over time and all that got preserved was the post-edited version. So I am suddenly less certain in saying the opening title sequence changed and they stopped doing this. I thought they did, but now that I've seen the quote from the episode come back, I'm suddenly wondering if we're dealing with different versions of the episodes and it's just a matter of the original did not get preserved, but this did. This is what's on the DVDs.
Yeah, I definitely noticed in the last episode we covered El Paso Stage, there was some image deterioration toward the bottom of the screen, and that one didn't have a quote. So I'm curious if maybe that was like an original recording versus this might have been a syndicated recording, therefore it's a later copy of better quality. So
it could be.
I don't know. Pure conjecture on my part, but...
Hey, broadcasters as powerful as the British Broadcasting Corporation have completely lost stuff a lot more recent than this.
Yeah.
Once you've gone digging for something and found out that it's disappeared into the memory hole, you start to appreciate a lot more how lucky we are to have any of this to watch.
Right. And the fact that we have all of it?
Yeah. So
mind-blowing.
It's kind of amazing. Old media is sometimes such a crapshoot, and in some cases we've been lucky we have the scripts. Like I pointed out, Jeanette Nolan was in a previous Gene written episode of a show that I don't know if it exists in any form. We know he wrote it. It's in Gene's records. But there's no script in the archive. There's no show in the archive. And, I'm not going to try to build an hour of the show around, that would be funny. Let's conjecture as to what this was about. We have a 2-word title, The Philanthropist, and go. Let's maybe not do that. Other things that are front and center in this episode, you can definitely tell what issues were on the table in the 1960 writers' strike. Because at the beginning of this episode, we get the producer's name, and then we get Gene's credit, and then we get Gary Nelson's credit at the beginning of the show, not over the end credits.
Yes.
And thus, above-the-line credits were born.
That is a good observation and one that I didn't think about until just now. So good call on that. One thing that really made this episode feel prescient, and this is probably more of a discussion point, but the lengths to which people will go to forget the less than savory parts of their past.
Yeah, I think that is very much, that is the center from which this entire story radiates outward. Yeah. I'll save further thoughts on that for our discussion. Yeah, it does color a lot of the acting choices, I believe. I think for the most part, the cast was on point with this one. Mm-hmm. Even Dobie. Okay, Dobie, this second time we've seen you, buddy. You're not any more trustworthy than you were the first time. But I kid Perry Cook. Now, there was something really odd about the shot of all of the ladies of the town sitting around, apparently is some sort of circular or trapezoidal sofa installation in the hotel lobby, waiting for Maya to come downstairs. There was something about that just, it did not feel natural, like, people would actually do this. It felt very, we're waiting for our cue. It felt like the women who, obviously were sitting there by Morgan, like, oh, well, we're not going to go to her, we're going to wait her out. And it's almost like they don't even want to be seen purposefully calling upon her. They're waiting for her to come out down the stairs so they can just kind of play it off as, oh, we bumped into her, but we also had this thing to tell her, like, we got to set the record straight with you about your mama, that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't feel like anybody bumps into anybody in this story, even at the beginning at the Hotel Carlton, where Maya first meets Paladin. That does not feel like it was a coinky-dink. Yeah, indeed. So I don't know if it was written that way, because we don't have the script, we just have the show. Right. So I don't know if there is a line of stage direction that's like, and this is not a coincidence, or if it was just a weird acting or directing choice. As much as I like Gary Nelson's later movie work, I find myself missing Ida Lupino already. Yeah, agree. I think Ida would have been a really great director for this episode because of the content. Did you notice that's the same wheel that we just saw in El Paso stage, but now with lettering on it? I literally had the same thought. I was like, it's the same one, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure it's set in the back of some prop room. Oh, yeah, just wheel it out. I'm sure every time we run into a gambling establishment in that show, it's been that wheel, and it's probably been that wheel for much longer than El Paso stage. Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was used prior to El Paso stage. Yeah, that makes it the Wheel of Time. Hey. Now, that big fight at the end in the Blue Dollar Saloon, Paladin is throwing punches right into the camera. And I was thinking, sir, you are making Sam Raimi so proud of his life choices right now. Because that kind of shot is Sam Raimi's whole career. And here we are doing this in 1962. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, but also like a way to make the audience feel more immersed in the story, like they're the ones getting punched. Yeah, and I like an episode that's like, okay, this is an immersive choice, and not a story choice that makes me feel like I've been punched in the face. What do you think of the ending of this episode? I think it's definitely interesting. There were a couple of lines that I'll bring up in discussion about maybe some morals, meanings, messages, or some of the philosophical, just a silly observation. Paladin's just ripping those boards off the doors like they're nothing. It's like, do these people not know how to nail stuff? Like, you would have thought it would have been, like, if they're keeping this woman captive, it would have been a lot more secure. But yeah, but how captive are they keeping her? I mean, she doesn't look like she's starving in there. So somehow someone is providing her with sustenance. Somebody is getting in.
They did say that you can see she's well kept here. I'm like, yeah, but she doesn't have freedom, so that's not well kept. so I thought that was kind of interesting. I like the line, and again, we can dive into this more during the discussion, but every man is half hero, half scared little boy. A woman who wants to be a real woman always forgets the second part. We talked a lot about the masculinity script, but it's almost like Gene is having her say every man gets scared, no matter how much bravado they put on. And women make men feel more masculine by pretending like they don't know that.
Yeah, and like, I think part of the point of that is that every man in this story is scared.
Oh, absolutely. They are all scared as heck.
I think the exact note I wrote down was, that is a spectacularly ambiguous ending, because there's a lot we do not know about what happens next. Paladin is left holding this document that supposedly could ruin the whole town. And, if the minister hadn't just handed him his gun, you'd think that what's happening as soon as we cut to credits is everyone jumps on Paladin, beats him up, and tears up those papers. Burns them or something. Mm-hmm. But instead we're left with a bit of a standoff that goes unresolved. And now, kind of the law of the Old West is Paladin's the one with the gun. He kind of wins the day by default.
Right.
Enlightened self-interest will probably force those men to back down, but it's very unclear. And then there's the voiceover poetry reading.
Yes.
That was an odd choice. We're not talking about automatic dialogue replacement or dubbing, which happens a lot with productions now, where actors go in and re-record their lines in a more sound-friendly environment than perhaps the soundstage was, ironically. This is just an added voiceover that I guess it's illuminating Paladin's thought process. It's something that seems very alien to the format of the show. It is maybe a bit Captain's Log-ish.
I think that's perhaps an apt comparison. And like Star Trek, leans into that Shakespearean type stuff. He's reciting Shakespeare's Sonnet 119.
Yeah. It's interesting that, okay, he didn't say this in front of everyone. We are hearing Paladin's thoughts. It's like, oh, this is a new corner for the show to take. Now we're all listening to his internal dialogue. Do we really want to listen to that with Paladin?
Valid.
Well, as long as he's just thinking Shakespeare at us.
I'm thinking Shakespeare in your general direction.
Back off or be barded.
Earl, if I may be afforded one silly observation before we move into discussion.
It's a heavy episode. I'll give you more than one.
Yeah.
Shoot your shot.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. Mary Gregory, who played Mrs. Briggs in this episode, you mentioned her extensive voice work. I didn't realize I'd heard her voice before in one of my all-time favorite, probably my third favorite animated series, is The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. She was in a particularly good episode in season 2 called Eclipse, set in New Orleans. Basically, there was kind of a running thing in that series. Every time Haji got a girlfriend, it ended very poorly because that girlfriend tried to kill them in some way. It was very odd, but that was something my sister and I picked up on immediately. There was one episode, it was like, oh, Haji's dating a girl. Uh-oh, no, she's sus, or whatever we said in 1996. But it's like, I don't think she's a good girl, and sure enough, she tried to kill them. Little on down the line, we watched this episode, and we're like, oh, no, this girl's sus too. Anyway, she did not play the sus girl. The sus girl was played by Jennifer Lean of Star Trek Voyager. But
that's right.
Mary Gregory... Yeah.
I remember Jennifer doing a lot of voice work on the Men in Black animated series.
Did she really?
Did not know that she had any part in Johnny Quest.
Yeah. No, that was the only episode she ever did. But, yeah, I remember that it's been, probably almost 20 years since I've watched that episode. But I have the whole series on DVD, so now I'm like, I need to go put that on. But anyway, Jennifer Lean played the crazy girlfriend who tried to kill everybody. Mary Gregory, she played Mrs. Adrian. She was like the proprietor of some type of place where they were staying, and that was where they met Elise, who apparently came sweet on Haji and then also like tried to kill them. So, because she was some sort of monster of some sort, and I don't remember exactly what, because again, it's been 20 years since I've seen that episode, but I remember really liking it.
I don't know if it's swipe left or swipe right. Whichever one gets you out of there, Haji, that's the direction you want to swipe.
Yeah, I think it's swipe left. So, Haji, just watch yourself, friend.
So many secrets, enough to sink a whole town. But are there secret messages that maybe the story is pointing us toward? What do you think, Ashley?
That's a good question, and maybe I should have mentioned it in silly observations, and I've already kind of alluded to it, but Alice makes me think of Janet Snakehole, the character that April creates in Parks and Recreation, a rich widow with a terrible secret. But to bring it back to more relevant discussion, I already mentioned it earlier, but I think it is fascinating what people will do to forget the less savory parts of their past, and to a further extent in this episode, to keep people from knowing those less savory parts. You know, what is he? I forget if Morgan says it or the minister says it, but they've brought good women here, started families, and they'll kill to keep it. And I'm like, all right, you want people to perceive you as a good person or good man, but you're willing to do something horrible to allow people to maintain that persona of you, which automatically makes you not a good person.
Yeah, because it kind of draws the sketch of, these guys have done this sort of thing to keep a secret before, and they're not going to stop today.
Yeah, it's hard to pretend like you have the high ground when you're willing to do this kind of things. And, and Paladin calls Morgan on this. He says, you were too ashamed to tell anyone about the marriage, but not too ashamed to take her money. He's tearing these folks a new one. Like, you guys want to act like you were all, well, upstanding, moral people now, but in reality, it's not the case.
Yeah, it seemed like, I almost said all the men, other than Paladin, in this story are utterly contemptible. Okay, the stagecoach driver, probably just doing his job. He's not in on whatever the rest of Codyville is in on.
Mm-hmm.
But you landed right on it. These guys want to have their own small-town taste of respectability or reaping the benefits of being considered community leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Which, in Morgan's case, of course, means he has his hands full of everyone else's money because he's the banker. Also, I'm thinking that naming a corrupt banker character Morgan, there is a 0% chance that is a coincidence.
Yeah, that ran across my mind as well.
Yeah, pure conjecture on my part, but yeah, I'm not buying that that's a coincidence. And so, for whatever Alice's supposed moral transgressions were, the episode makes it very clear, at least by way of Paladin, Gene drops on us that, what is moral is perhaps a value judgment that means different things in different times and situations. And Alice really emerges as the only honest person in this town. So, yeah, I kind of wanted to burn Codyville to the ground by the end of this story, because this just seems like a place full of awful people. Please talk me out of that, because surely that can't be the case. They can't all be that bad, can they?
I think it is possible for people to change and move past things that they are no longer glad that they did, or if they've had a checkered past. I think it's possible for people to turn away from that and become different or better people, if you will. And I think sometimes, like, if we are ashamed of our past, there's a tendency to want to rewrite history versus acknowledging, yeah, I didn't do that right, but I've changed since then. I've come around. I've made different choices than I would have years ago. But I think these people, instead of acknowledging what they were, which, might not be considered moral in the society in which they currently find themselves, instead of acknowledging, yeah, that's who I was then, that's not who I am now, they're trying to pretend like it didn't happen, and that's dishonest.
I know that I have used the phrase before that, I have not always been who I am now. Maybe that's not saying a lot, but it is honest.
Yeah.
These guys they want it all papered over. Apparently at all costs. Someone else's life is not too high a price to ask, and certainly not Alice's life. I mean, how long ago did this happen? Keeping her caged like an animal.
She is apparently, at least if she had been caged for a while, she'd at least been able to write her daughter. So she was at least afforded the dignity of letters. But I have a feeling, because when her daughter makes a point of saying, but then the letter stopped a few months ago. So I would imagine that maybe she's been locked up for a couple of months, because I don't think they would risk that information getting out.
If you're able to get the banker and the minister in your pocket, or actually, I guess whose pocket they're in is the banker. He's running the show.
Yeah.
He potentially seems to be the one with the most to lose.
Yes, because he was married to her.
Yeah.
Or is married to her. Maybe. Unclear.
There is a lot left. It seems intentionally vague in this story.
Yeah.
And that brings me back again to the ending. There was a lot of very carefully coded language here.
Yes.
To allow this show to operate as a piece of TV for the whole family in 1962. Because the immorality of which Alice Ferguson is accused is basically running a bar that doubled as sometimes a house of prostitution.
Yeah.
The precise wording of the script really does quite a dance around whether or not she ever took that up herself as a side gig. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But it was her establishment that was the hub of this activity. And so the men in the story, again trying to cover up their shame about that, hold her solely responsible. They're not keeping anyone else in there. Just her. And again, we're kind of running into what we have discussed in El Paso Stage and in Charlie Red Dog. What was the relationship between mother and daughter prior to this? We don't know, other than that Maya was sent off to school and that somehow Alice was able to afford to keep her wherever she was indefinitely until apparently she crossed the wrong person. Perhaps until she let slip that there was a memoir that she had written, which, tripped the guys over into panic mode, and so they do something as wildly inhumane as boarding her up in the building, which, that's horror movie stuff right there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of blanks that were being left to fill in for ourselves, but I just find it interesting that the script is dancing around the edge of getting into some, perhaps even weightier topics without really taking the plunge. It's like dropping you some hints. I'm not going to spell it out, work it out for yourself. And to some extent that may be because we want the adults watching to work it out for themselves. We don't want the kids watching to work it out. And we don't even want to ask Mom, what's that mean? Or ask Dad, what was that about? That was confusing.
Yeah. because they're all like too pearl clutchy to say it out loud. Which, I mean, admittedly, this is what, 1961?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, that tracks. That hasn't changed.
yeah, no. But the fact that you have like this discussion around the ambiguity of morality here, and the players that are involved kind of gives that some more nuance. There's a lot of discussion about what's the truth. It was the talk about white picket fences and mud and
right.
And what she brought was compassion. And that's a really interesting take.
Yeah, it is. Boy, do I have a lot to say about that in the wrap-up.
Yeah.
Because I feel like what this episode is not coming out and saying may be just as important as what it is putting in front of people, because there's a lot of stuff peeking out between the lines here. It's really kind of a Chinese puzzle box that Gene has written here, because he has to fit it within broadcast standards and practices in 1962.
Yeah, well, I think, friend, we might need to move it towards the morals meeting messages of our discussion.
Okay, well, I say we walk it and we don't try to jump the stagecoach. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that is a fine suggestion. I will not be doing any stage jumping today.
Lots of potential messages in this one, Ashley, and some of them no one dared to say out loud. What do you think? What did you find here in Alice?
I think it's the interesting philosophical question of where does one's morality end and another's begin? I think that's an interesting question. I think some of the things that we're discussing here about, trying to sanitize one's history, make it look better, that's unfortunately very prescient in our country and still relevant, sadly. There's like a perhaps less strong or less prominent message, or at least one that's not as explicitly discussed. And again, like you said, we're dancing around a lot of stuff. There's a lot of men being afraid of a woman who has power.
Or knowledge.
Yeah. And the power that knowledge gives. Because they don't want other people to have that knowledge.
There is a reason that the phrase knowledge is power is a phrase, and that basically we all know it.
Also, it's in the Schoolhouse Rock theme song, so people of a certain age.
Absolutely. That would be us. I felt like there were things that the episode hinted at that even on the cusp of, the so-called sexual revolution of the 1960s, there was some stuff that Gene couldn't dare say on TV, but it's kind of peeking out between the lines. Kind of like, you ever had a cat stick their nose between the Venetian blinds? And you're outside and you look at your own window and there's just like this cat nose and maybe just barely the eyes sticking out. There is some stuff peeking out like this. There is perhaps the very vague, shadowy outline of an argument about not demonizing or criminalizing sex workers or their customers. And now,
could see that too.
So often in the format of the Western, you can usually find this subject peeking out from behind a somewhat overused character archetype or trope, kind of the hooker with a heart of gold. But the subject of sex work and sex surrogacy is as real an issue now as it was in 62 or in 1870-something. And at some point there needs to be a real conversation about this. But it's something that is unlikely to happen because people are clutching the pearls as loudly as they possibly can to drown out the sound of people trying to have that conversation. So I felt like this was background waiting to become foreground. But could Gene have gotten this idea on the air in a Western in 1962? Oh, hell no.
No.
There are enough hints here that it was a subject he wanted to tackle. And I appreciate that at least here he is trying to find a way, even if it's through a lot of coded language and a lot of this all-encompassing verbal dance around, doing 360 degrees around just directly saying the topic. At least there is a sign of it being handled in a more mature way than, say, Les Girls.
Yes.
And so in some ways, I find what this episode does not say at least as fascinating as what it does say. But let's focus in on a line of dialogue and dialogue exchange, actually, of what it did say. Maya says she was a woman who did wrong. And Paladin responds, perhaps by your standards, it may even be that those are the right standards for the day. For the day meaning for now, but not necessarily in Codyville's past. It's kind of funny, but the phrase, laws may vary from state to state, comes to mind here, because laws are different from one place to another. Where I live, there has been this long-running, hotly contested ballot issue. For years it keeps turning up. Alcohol sales on Sunday. On one side, you've got people who want to be able to grab some beer ahead of watching football on Sunday with their buddies. On the other side, well, there are those very loud pearls being clutched. And I say this as someone who does not watch much football and doesn't drink any beer. It's a tug-of-war between people who have a specific idea of what constitutes a recreational activity, harmless fun, and people who think it is their business what other people's recreational activities should be, or, dare we say, their entire lives. And rinse and repeat throughout history. It's still going on. I'm sure I don't even have to flag down the issues where this is still going on. Paladin makes a really good point that, the Bible has a lot to say about forgiveness. What he stops just short of saying is that so often the people who claim as loudly as they can to know the Bible best seem to have conveniently skipped over all of those passages about forgiveness. Funny how that works. And so, we get constant debates on things like, we try to couch it in very negative terms like moral relativism. But I think what Paladin is saying is right. What was acceptable under one set of circumstances may not be acceptable later, but that doesn't mean you keep going back after, unless it was something particularly heinous. An actual crime. Which Alice is not demanding money from anyone to keep her memoir secret. She may not be starving, but I don't believe she is holding all this information for a ransom. Did you get that impression?
No, it's more or less, it sounded like she was keeping the location of her memoir a secret because she wouldn't tell them they kept her locked away because, whether they can find where she wrote it down or not, the secret still lives inside her.
Yeah. For all the contempt that I hold, every man in this story in, they at least don't appear to have taken more extreme measures, though who knows how long that would have held.
Well, and, Morgan goes in to
finish her off.
Do her in. Yeah, he's like, no, we're just gonna kill this.
Yeah, that's how bad he wants to gain control of the situation, is he wants the secrets to die with her.
Yeah.
Boy, it's almost not very satisfying that we didn't get to see him blow himself to bits, but, 1962 television, I understand why. It's just that was a very satisfying piece of information that he failed to be warned about. Mm-hmm. Stagecoach driver was yelling at him about barrels are full of mud, which means, really, he probably couldn't have shot Paladin with it either. That was a total bluff.
Yeah, it was more of a deterrent than anything.
Yeah, but Morgan is, he's decided, okay, this is enough of a situation for me that a life needs to be taken. I know there's a saying that secrets will eat you up, and you shouldn't keep that kind of secret. Everyone does have secrets, though. A much later staple of American television, House MD, made that very clear. Everyone's got secrets, and everyone does lie. How big of a secret is that lie keeping? That's where everyone kind of has to discover where their moral compass is pointing, and none of the guys in Codyville can find true north with theirs.
The minister does show repentance. Perfect for a minister to show repentance towards the end, where he comes in and brings Paladin his gun, and he's like, I should have never let this happen. And he owns his part of this tragedy, and I respect him for that. It is really hard to admit when you've messed up, especially when it's something big like this.
Right. I do appreciate the minister for that. It's just early in the story when he is, I'm not saying he has taken any specific oath, but if he had, he would have violated it 5 ways to Wednesday before Act 2 was over. Yeah. And so a little bit hard to let him off the hook, but finally someone shows some backbone. It does not seem like that changes anyone else's approach to the problem, though. Yeah. He is acting very much alone there. Not quite as honorable as Robert April, but, okay, I'll give him points for deciding, okay, this has gone far enough. My part in this has gone far enough. Mm-hmm. Let's do something about this so it doesn't escalate. Well, I mean, it escalates, just not in a way that anybody anticipated.
Right. And, as soon as Paladin has a gun, the other guys are like, whoa.
Yeah, at that point, the balance of power has changed enough that, I'm not worried about what happens to Paladin after the end credits. Mm-hmm. Whereas without that, this would be a wildly ambiguous ending. It'd be like, whoa, is that the end of the show?
Yeah. It kind of... It makes you question, okay, well, who's Maya's father? Is it Morgan? Is it Paladin?
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
Your mother hired me to kill a man, and I wouldn't do it. And she later forgave me for it, and decided it was an okay idea. But when we find out that man was Morgan, he's like, yeah, that was a mistake. But he's like, but we remained good friends after that. I was like, well, there's implications that she also was running a house of ill repute, or at least at minimum allowed those activities to happen.
Right.
She provided comfort to the people who frequented her establishment, place where they could unwind, play cards, not feel so lonely. So it's not explicit, but there was enough that it made me wonder.
I missed that completely. It never even crossed my mind. That adds a whole different layer to the episode. It's like I need to go back and watch it again now.
Yeah, because all Maya says is my mother sent me east to go to school, but it doesn't sound like she even knows who her father is, because it's never brought up. Paladin doesn't even ask, well, what about your father?
Yeah, and the fact that he does not ask, it may or may not... Wow. Oh.
Da, da, da.
Da-da-da-da. That's why his business card's getting bigger. He's hiding behind it.
He's all like,
Well, this was interesting. Okay, this discussion went in directions I never even expected, and now I'm kind of like, wait a minute, did I even watch the show the right way?
I mean, I only got to watch it twice before we started recording today, dude. So, but that was just something that caught me, and I was like, I wonder. Because, I mean, it sounds like Paladin is a well-known man about town, if you catch my drift. So I wouldn't be surprised if she offered compassion to Paladin.
Right. And we really are not given a time frame for, how long ago was this?
Yeah.
Because interestingly, once we get into Codyville, nobody knew anything about a daughter. Of course, that could be Morgan BSing again, as he does throughout the show.
Sure.
Saying, oh, there was no indication that there was an heir to the estate.
Well, and, if you... not that it really mattered in TV, but if you want to do the math, Jeanette Nolan was born in 1911. Paladin. Richard Boone was born in 1917. The gal who played Maya, Jeanette Engstrom, she was born in 1942. The math tracks.
Yeah.
Especially towards the end, Paladin, has his arm around Alice. Yeah. All in the ending.
Yeah, very familiar with
that.
her,
Yeah, which, would have been wildly inappropriate in a lot of ways in, 1870-something.
Yeah.
So...
But he didn't boop her on the nose. I mean, that's...
He did not boop her.
That's how
he wasn't concussed.
That's how you know who he really likes. It's who he boops on the nose.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, also, it was not a booping scenario, so... Right.
This, there is a time and a place for the boop, and this was not such a time or place. Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com.
On the next Gene-ology, the Gatling gun. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.